Gino Kenny, the People Before Profit TD, is with me now to discuss his bill that has been introduced to the Dáil today, which aims to end the criminalisation of cannabis for personal use. Gino, you're very welcome to the show. Can you explain exactly what you are proposing?
So in the bill, it's an amendment bill. So it amends the existing legislation, which is the Misuse of Drugs Act 1977. And if our bill was legislated tomorrow, somebody could possess up to 7 grams of cannabis for their personal use. So at the moment, obviously, it stipulates that there's no tolerance whatsoever of any kind of description of any kind of small possession of cannabis. So this would change the Misuse of Drugs Act for decriminalising the person. Obviously, on the other hand, cannabis would be still illegal, which is a shame, really. That's what it's trying to do. There's a groundswell, Kieran, in relation to drug reform in this country. We've had 42 years of the Misuse of Drugs Act. I think it's quite draconian that somebody that chooses to use cannabis then can be subject then to court appearances, having a kind of a criminal record. That's out of date, and we need to do something. Tens of thousands of people have got criminal records for small possessions of drugs.
Yeah.
So I don't see what purpose that serves, and I think that is out of date, out of time, and we need to do something different. And how different that difference is, not criminalising people for small possessions of cannabis.
It's kind of, we'd have this kind of incongruous situation though, wouldn't we, whereby you could have small amounts of cannabis and it'd be perfectly fine. You wouldn't be criminalised for it, but we'd be still relying on, and maybe relying is the wrong word, but relying on criminal gangs to import that cannabis.
Exactly. And I think, this is a stepping stone to a regulatory system, because as you said, you will still have that kind of paradigm in relation to where the criminal, criminal gangs control the market, the black market of cannabis distribution. So you'll still have that. So this is kind of trying to decriminalise the person. And I think somewhere down the line there needs to be a regulatory system. And that's what People for Profit is in favour of, having a regulatory system such as what's happened in Luxembourg, what's happened in Malta, it's happening in many states in the United States, it's happening in Canada, and probably more importantly of all is in Germany. In a year and a half's time, the German coalition are saying that they need to have a regulatory system of cannabis, and it would be worth a lot of money to the German economy, because all the money that's kind of spent on cannabis every year, that goes largely into the black market. So if the state took control of a controlled drug, which is the ironic thing about it, then they would have revenues from cannabis. So I think it's a no-brainer, but it will take time to get all these kind of arguments out. I understand why people would be opposed to that. I understand that, perfectly understand, but I think it's good that we're having a debate, a grown-up debate, and we can kind of talk about these things. Yeah. And I think the more you talk about something, the less mystery behind it, because there's a lot of mystery and stigma behind cannabis use, and people are stigmatized because they use it, and they shouldn't be stigmatized. And if people want to use cannabis, that's their business. If people want to use alcohol, that's their business. Obviously, it's society's business if it's controlled largely by sometimes very unscrupulous people in society. That's all our business. And we should be quite worried about that this has happened. So we want to try do a different system, and hopefully with this bill starts that debate, and then hopefully it gets passed. Yeah. And people won't be facing ridiculous situations where they're going into court. Yeah. Small possessions of cannabis. Ridiculous.
Let me introduce Christy Galligan, who's a former Garda sergeant, and he's with us as well. Christy, can you understand the logic as Gino sets it out?
I do understand the logic of Gino, and I can understand where he's coming from, that people with small amounts of cannabis, that's the Gardaí, rather than having to prosecute people for small amounts of cannabis, that they could receive a caution under the adult caution scheme. But there is a lot of study out there, and if you look at the Lancet or you look at the other studies from America where they've legalized it in some places and it's become a very commercial business, the big problem they have over there is that there's no regulatory oversight in relation to, and there have been no clinical trials or deep understanding of the effects of allowing people to smoke or become dependent on cannabis use over a lengthy period of time. And that's the biggest problem, that there has been no regulatory oversight, that if we introduce something like this, and I understand where Gino's coming from, I absolutely understand where Gino's coming from. I'm sure the Gardaí would rather deal with other things and then small amounts of cannabis. But there is the downside to cannabis as well, and the adverse effects of cannabis on people who are to become kind of dependent on it and on a daily basis. And while we all know what the effects are, and I've seen it in 30 years of what I did as an enforcement and involved in the drug squad here, and going to doing educational courses in relation to drug and alcohol addiction, that it's very important to understand that there is a downside to this, and the issue in relation to cannabis is not like cannabis in the 60s or 70s, where THC was very, very mild within the cannabis itself. But we're growing cannabis now where they have a THC of 20% or 20-fold more than it was in the 1960s and 70s, and a very addictive substance. There's something like 60 active cannabinoids within cannabis itself. So there has been no clinical trials per se to show us the effects of the constant use of cannabis per se, other than the outcomes where they have adverse effects on certain people, like, the psychotic symptoms, anxiety, palpitations, and all of that. And where people who are drunk driving as well, it's become more prevalent now that people are taking cannabis, and it's, as we used to say, the stepping stone to harder drugs like heroin or cocaine or crack cocaine. And that's my worry. Where is the cutoff point when you introduce something like this? Then where is the cutoff point? Yeah. And who will regularize it? And where are the clinical trials that will suggest that it's okay to use it?
Let me go back to Gino, because Gino, I suspect the concerns Christy raises would be concerns a lot of other people listening might have. Again, like Christy, that they'll accept the logic of what you're saying, but they'll worry about the health implications.
Yeah, I mean, of course, people can manifest a cannabis dependency. Right? We understand that, and people can run into difficulties. And we're all cognizant of that and the potential harms. But on the flip side of that, you have to look at the harms of what prohibition is doing. So there's no control whatsoever in the cannabis production and potency of cannabis. So you will have, and that chap is right, the last 10, 15 years, the potency of cannabis has evolved into quite different forms, different strengths of THC. But if you don't have regulation, this is the consequences of no regulation. Because criminal gangs they're not into regulating. They don't care what's actually in that substance. If it was a regulatory system, if people want to use cannabis, they can go into a dispensary and they know exactly what they're consuming. And they don't want most people do not want high strength THC cannabis, just don't want that. They want a very low THC, high CBD. So in that system, people can make a very conformed choice, and if they want to consume cannabis, that's their choice. I don't believe this is a gateway. There's no evidence whatsoever this is a gateway drug to harder drugs. That's kind of talk that was used in the 1980s. It's quite lazy and it's out of date.
All right. Well, I was going to wrap things up, Christy. I kind of want to go back to you, though, there, given that it was Gino accused you of maybe citing lazy, out-of-date evidence.
No, it's not lazy, out-of-date evidence. There's plenty of studies to show that there is a gateway drug to harder drugs. And I'm not.
Tell me where the evidence is.
I mean, you can look at the Lancet, and you look at can look at anything in the National Medical Journal of America and all of those.
You can't equate cannabis with heroin.
Okay, hold on. Let Christy, Gino, just let Christy respond in fairness.
Yeah, no, we need proper regulatory oversight to show that we can evaluate through clinical trials to evaluate the safety and the efficacy. If we're going to allow for the legalization of small quantities for people's personal use, we want to ensure that we evaluate, like other commercial drugs, the safety and the efficacy, and that and oversight of the drugs that the people use.
Christy Galligan is a former Garda Sergeant, and Gino Kenny is a People Before Profit TD. Gentlemen, thank you both very much for joining me here on the show.
The Hard Shoulder